Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Two more Conservative candidates have launched their campaigns to replace Theresa May as party leader and become the next Prime Minister. Boris Johnson, currently the front-runner in the race, said he was determined to take Britain out of the EU by the end of October. He said he wasn't aiming to leave without a deal, but he would prepare for that outcome. The Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, speaking in the last hour, said he was different from Westminster elites and the country needed a new kind of leader. He and Boris Johnson are the last of the 10 candidates to launch their campaigns. The first ballot of Conservative MPs takes place tomorrow. Here's our political editor, Laura Kunsberg.
Here he is.
Will Boris Johnson be the Prime Minister?
Boris!
His dream for more than a decade.
Come back, Boris.
The waiting crush felt like the return of a long-lost unholy union. Family in one corner, Tory Remainers and Leavers again sharing the pews. Hoping he can bring the slow-moving Brexit crisis to an end.
Delay means defeat. Delay means Corbyn. Kick the can again, and we kick the bucket. After 3 years and 2 missed deadlines, we must leave the EU on October the 31st.
Time and again, he mentioned his double victory as Mayor of London, pitching himself as the man to beat Labour.
In Jeremy Corbyn, we have a man who is far to the left of Ken Livingstone in his nihilistic determination to hike taxes to penal rates, to attack wealth creation. My friends, we cannot let them anywhere near Downing Street.
He carries baggage, though, and plenty of it.
Mr Johnson, you suggested that Brexit would be a straightforward win-win, and actually it's been a chaotic mess. As Foreign Secretary, you offended people at home and abroad. You have a reputation for being cavalier with vital detail, and already in this campaign you're telling some supporters you'll do everything to avoid leaving the EU without a deal, and others that you gladly would do that. It's a simple question. If you want to be Prime Minister, can the country trust you?
Well, yes, of course, Laura. And the answer, I think, perhaps in that great minestrone of observations, as one substantive question, which was that one crouton I picked up, which was that you think that I've been somehow inconsistent. I mean, somehow inconsistent, Laura, in saying that I don't want a no-deal outcome, but I think it is right for our great country to prepare for that outcome. And I think what most people understand, if we make the preparations now, we will carry the conviction with our friends and partners that we are indeed able to make such an exit if we really have to.
He can't joke his way out of controversy, though. There were some jeers.
As letterboxes and bank robbers.
When he was challenged on remarks made about Muslim women and being fit for office.
If sometimes in the course of trying to get across what I genuinely think, I use phrases and language that have caused offence, of course I'm sorry for the offence that I have caused, but I will continue to speak as directly as I can.
Not so direct. When asked if he'd ever used cocaine, he wouldn't answer.
I think what most people in this country really want us to focus on in this campaign, if I may say so, is what we can do for them.
It's Boris Johnson's to lose, but there are plenty of others trying to shove him off the stage. The final launch today makes 10 candidates in the race. Other voices in the Tory party ready to argue for change.
Now, this is a phrase that I've not used very often, but he's the man for me.
The Home Secretary after the big promotion too.
As we face the challenges that are unlike any that we have faced before, this calls for a new kind of leadership from a new kind of leader. A leader is not just for Christmas or just for Brexit. We can't risk going with someone who feels like the short-term comfort zone choice. I'd say I'm a change candidate. Yeah, Boris Johnson is yesterday's news.
Not if he can help it, though.
For Brexit!
Mr Johnson believes there are plenty more chapters in his story. There's a long way to go in this race. But whether you love to hate him or hate to love him, Boris Johnson and the resistance he provokes will simply not be ignored.
And we've heard really very little, Sophie, from Boris Johnson until today. That's going to have to change in the coming days and weeks as this race progresses. And frankly, from all of the 10 candidates, there have been so many of them in the race that really it's been at a stage of broad brush statements about what they would like to do, whether about Brexit, of course, the main issue, or about all of the other myriad of challenges that are facing the country. But after tomorrow, when the next round of voting will take place, a couple of MPs are likely to be knocked out and we move on to the next phase. This race is just on the point of starting to get really, really serious. And for all of us, even though it's Tory members that have a say, it couldn't be more important, because at the conclusion of this contest, in about 6 weeks' time, a new Prime Minister will move into number 10.
Laura, thank you.
Boris Johnson finally broke cover today, taking centre stage to officially launch his bid to be Conservative leader and Prime Minister. In a speech that was light on both jokes and policy, he pledged a new determination that Britain would leave the EU by October the 31st. He warned Conservatives that any further delay to Brexit would play into the hands of Labour and Jeremy Corbyn. The former Foreign Secretary insisted he could be trusted as leader, but he was forced to dodge some uncomfortable questions. From Westminster, here's our political correspondent, Paul Brand.
Finally today, he stepped out. The cameras always waiting for what Boris Johnson might be walking into. Inside, this was the launch to be seen at. Past leaders, present cabinet, a family affair too. All here to back the man currently out in front.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you.
Boris Johnson led the campaign to leave the EU and likes to sound as if he still does.
After 3 years and 2 missed deadlines, we must leave the EU on October the 31st.
But not everyone here to support him also backed Brexit. And to a degree, this speech was a careful compromise.
So let me clear that I am not aiming for a no-deal outcome. I don't think that we will end up with any such thing. But it is only responsible to prepare. Delay means defeat. Delay means Corbyn. Kick the can again, and we kick the bucket.
He has beaten Labour before, reeling off his record as Mayor of London.
What I want to do now, with your help, is to do for the whole country what we did in London.
But it's what else he's done that raises questions.
Have you done anything illegal in the whole of your life? And the problem that you do have in this contest, as much as you might refute it, is one of trust, is one of reliability. So may I ask you, do you regret any of the mistakes that you've made?
Paul, have I ever done anything illegal? Look, I mean, I cannot swear that I've always observed a top speed limit in this country of 70 miles an hour. I'm gonna, on your general question, of course, occasionally some plaster comes off the ceiling as a result of a phrase I may have used. Of course, I'm sorry for the offence that I have caused, but I will continue to speak as directly as I can.
Though not so direct about whether he'd taken cocaine.
I think what most people in this country really want us to focus on in this campaign, if I may say so, is what we can do for them.
And with his speech well received, his supporters are forgiving all his other words.
Politicians mustn't be bland and boring and dull. They must say things that cut through to voters.
Even if it's offensive?
What?
Even if it's highly offensive?
Well, people mustn't be snowflakes.
Listen, let me tell you, Paul, Boris is going all the way this time.
Any other event today was always going to seem less gripping. Sajid Javid's audience kept waiting while he voted in Parliament. The last to launch, but claiming to be a fresh face.
As we face the challenges that are unlike any that we have faced before, this calls for a new kind of leadership from a new kind of leader.
In other words, not Boris Johnson.
I'd say I'm a change candidate. Yeah, Boris Johnson is yesterday's news.
And yet, still the man of the moment. Yes, Boris Johnson has a past, but right now, he's firm favourite to be the future. Paul Brandt, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, our political editor, Robert Peston, is currently preparing for his show tonight and joins us now. Robert, is Boris Johnson still the front runner?
He certainly is, Charlene. I mean, his big promise to Tory voters in this election is that he would take the UK out of the EU, deal or no deal, by the 31st of October. Now, his main rivals, Michael Gove, Jeremy Hunt, say that is a foolish promise to make because they believe that Parliament would block a no-deal Brexit. There was a test of Parliament's view on that this afternoon with a motion put down by Jeremy Corbyn and the senior Tory Oliver Letwin that would have actually started the way to blocking a no-deal Brexit, but Parliament voted against Corbyn and Letwin, which is a massive boost to Boris Johnson. We will get the first round of the election tomorrow, and it is possible that even tomorrow Boris Johnson will be over the first threshold that would guarantee him a place in the final runoff. He is the man to beat. Very difficult to see how he can be stopped at the moment.
All right, Robert, thanks very much for that.
Boris Johnson, the front-runner in the Conservative leadership election, broke his silence today to set out his pitch to be the next Prime Minister. Despite criticism that he'd been hiding from media scrutiny, he took just 6 questions from journalists. In the Commons, opposition MPs failed to seize control of Parliament's agenda in an attempt to stop no deal. Well, our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. Gary.
In the months after Boris Johnson's resignation as Foreign Secretary, he was a pretty lonely figure around the House of Commons. You'd see him just sort of wander through. Nobody would walk up to chat to him, anything. You wouldn't have known that today. MPs were packing into his launch. Some of them, no doubt, because they're dewy-eyed admirers, but some of them, I have to tell you, because they think there's a bandwagon, and some of them will tell you quite easily and freely, privately, that they have enormous reservations about the candidate that they're backing. His people felt that this limited exposure to questioning went fine, though one of the aides to him joked to me afterwards that they were going to lock him up in the Venezuelan embassy now and not risk any more of that. The other candidates are still defining themselves against him. Sajid Javid, the last to launch, actually referred to Boris as yesterday's news. The other big thing happening here, though, was, as you said, the vote that was happening. Labour and other opposition parties and Tory rebels rather sprang this on the government, and they feel, most of the people who are involved in this, that this wheeze was possibly, probably even, the last chance that Parliament had to start a process that could stop no deal. It's just possible there's another wheeze that can come up. Maybe the Speaker could invent something, but a lot of them are, who were backing this felt that it was the last chance. It failed, and with it, that failure, probably comes an increased chance, many think, of an early general election, certainly an increased chance of no deal. Here's how another extraordinary day here went.
Come back. His opponents joked he'd been under house arrest, kept from scrutiny. The great communicator. His campaign team didn't trust to campaign.
Stop Brexit! You shut that window pretty quick.
Are you coming in, Nicky? No, certainly not.
A Michael Gove supporter walked past outside. Inside, scores of MPs, dominated by familiar pro-Brexit faces, but some who voted Remain as well, all calculating Boris Johnson was their party's best chance.
After 3 years and 2 missed deadlines, we must leave the EU on October the 31st. We can get Brexit done and we can win. We can unite our country and our society.
His team knows this candidate has many questions to answer.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm told we're going to have 6 questions from representatives of the media. Well, that's a huge number.
Do you regret any of the mistakes that you've made in your political and your personal life?
Do I do what I promise I'm going to do as a politician? Yes. That is the issue. That's the issue that you legitimately raise, Paul. And the answer to that is yes. You look at what we did in City Hall.
Already in this campaign, you're telling some supporters you'll do everything to avoid leaving the EU without a deal, and others that you gladly would do that. It's a simple question. If you want to be Prime Minister, Can the country trust you?
You think that I've been somehow inconsistent. I mean, somehow inconsistent, Laura, in saying that I don't want a no-deal outcome, but I think it is right for our great country to prepare for that outcome.
On the very day the EU repeated there would be no renegotiation of the divorce deal agreed with Theresa May, he said, under him, there would be.
I think they will rapidly come to see that they have a new government with a new mandate, a new earnestness, a new determination to get things done, a new optimism and a new confidence about what Britain can do. And I think they will respond to that. And I think there will be a symmetrical enthusiasm on the other side of the Channel about getting this thing done and moving forward.
People who have worked closely with you do not think you're fit to be Prime Minister.
Well, Beth, I'm delighted that many of my former colleagues seem to dissent from that view. But
he knows some of those cheering in the room are late joiners who hope they're backing the winner. All know he is a choice that comes with risk.
Well, people will wonder, as you saw him close up working in London, the reason you didn't support him in the first place might be because you're not entirely sure he's up to it.
Not necessarily. No, I don't think that's true at all.
Not
I think that would be the wrong
necessarily.
assumption. My view is I saw, as I've said before, what he's capable of achieving in London.
I'm not overwhelmed by that support. You're another Tory MP
No,
hitting the
I'm
panic button, aren't you?
No, I'm not. No, absolutely not. No.
You were a big Theresa May backer.
I'm a big Boris backer.
Yes, but he betrayed her, he undermined her, and now you're backing Boris.
I don't think he betrayed her. I think we need Boris right now. Boris is the man for
You're
this
hitting
country.
the panic button, aren't you? You're not really sure about him at all.
Certainly not.
You're
Certainly
a Theresa
not.
May man. You don't
I've been a
trust
friend.
Boris.
I've been a friend of Boris for many years. He'll be a great Prime Minister.
The reality is that he's saying 31st of October, and I think that is the deadline.
And you 100% trust him?
Absolutely. Oh, yes.
We will be out on the 31st of October.
I have had several meetings with him personally.
Yeah, but there are other people who've had meetings. He seems to be saying something slightly different.
No, sorry, Gary. No, I'm not buying into that one. I form my judgment according to what I observe, what I ask.
Tell you what, if he becomes PM,
And you know what,
I'll
Steve?
eat my hat.
We're going to go for a drink. You're going to eat your hat if Boris
If he
becomes Prime
becomes
Minister.
Prime Minister, I'll
Hang
eat
on,
my
let's
hat.
have a quick look.
Beyond Brexit, what does the Treasury Minister, some think he's lining up for the job of Chancellor, think? Boris Johnson's talk of lavish tax cuts for higher earners.
All of the plans that Boris has announced have been fully costed.
I'm not sure that's
and fit
right.
within our fiscal headroom.
They're not remotely
well,
costed.
Gary, I'll be very happy to come on your show in due course and
Wonderful.
explain it.
They're not costed at all.
They are costed.
Where?
Well, for example, the
He
plans
talks
on...
about raising the higher rate.
Yes.
He hasn't got the money for that.
That costs £9 billion. That fits within our fiscal headroom.
Plunged into the middle of the Tory leadership contest, a critical vote in the Commons. Opposition parties with Tory rebels trying to find a way to stop the next Prime Minister leaving the EU with no deal.
It might even improve the quality of the leadership debate going on in my party, which needs to be improved, if we actually force some reality into the exchanges of the extremely distinguished candidates.
One Tory said if this attempt failed and the next Prime Minister tried to exit with no deal, he would join Labour and back a general election.
If we get to a point where a Prime Minister is intent on doing this, the only way of stopping that Prime Minister will be to bring down that Prime Minister's government. And I simply have to say here and now, I will not hesitate to do that.
The noes to the left, 309.
The government victory means the Brexit options narrow. It also meant a late start for the final leadership contenders' launch.
Now, this is a phrase that I've not used very often, but he's the man for me. Ladies and gentlemen, Sajid Javid.
Yeah, Boris Johnson is yesterday's news, right? In that he's been around in politics for a while, he's achieved a lot, and he's probably, he's still got a big role to play. But I think if we are trying to connect with the next generation and move forward as a country, then I think it's time for the next generation with a bold new agenda.
His pitch, you need a leader not drenched in Brexit. An outsider like Margaret Thatcher. Not the man so many in the party are rushing towards right now.
Well, joining me now is Boris backing Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg. When Boris Johnson says that he wants to take the UK out of the EU on October the 31st, deal or no deal, do you trust him?
Yes, absolutely.
even though today he softened a little, didn't he? He said he's not aiming for a no deal. Did that give you pause for thought?
No, because that's my view as well. I've never thought that no deal is the optimal answer. I think a deal would be better. But the key comment that he made, to my mind, was that if you kick the can, you kick the bucket. And kicking the can down the road is no longer an option. If we don't leave on the 31st of October, people will feel completely let down.
And if we don't leave on October 31st, Boris Johnson should quit as Prime Minister, if indeed he is Prime Minister by then.
Well, he got asked that question at his launch, and it seemed to me to ask somebody when they're going to resign before they've got the job is a little bit eccentric.
Sure, but you'd expect him to deliver on that promise, and if he doesn't, there'll be consequences.
Look, I'm completely confident he will deliver on that promise. I think the consequences of not delivering aren't about Boris. They're about trust in politics, they're about the electability of the Conservatives, and what would happen in an ensuing general election.
So let's talk about trust then. Can you really trust someone who's been sacked from a front bench job for lying, who's been sacked from a job in journalism for fabricating a quote? Can that person be trusted with the highest office in the land?
Oh yes, I think picking on a journalistic extravagance when he was a very young journalist
is fabricating a quote.
Look, if he'd done that when he was editor of the Times and he was 50, it would be really serious. But it was a sort of gossip column style story. It was fundamentally trivial.
And he lied to the previous Tory leader, Michael Howard, about an affair?
Well, I think people are entitled to keep their private life private. I actually don't think you're entitled to ask people questions about their private lives. I think it's deeply intrusive. It's nobody else's business. And that if he's asked an unfair question, then I don't think the answer carries consequences with it. So I trust him on policy, and I trust him on the ability to be a fine Prime Minister for this country.
The problem is so often his professional conduct seems to mirror his personal conduct. So when he says today, you know, some plaster comes off the ceiling when I say the wrong thing, actually people's lives are sometimes buried under that debris, aren't they?
No, that's not quite what he says. I think you're quoting him unfairly.
He said plaster comes off the ceiling when he picks the wrong phrase.
Not when he says the wrong thing, because he uses phraseology that is descriptive and which voters hear and it cuts through with. There are a lot of grey politicians around. There are politicians like me who always use boring phraseology as our sort of professional attribute. But Boris doesn't do that, and that's why voters like him, because his phrases get through.
Okay, so judge him on the terms you've set out, judge him on what he achieved at the Foreign Office, where his number two, Sir Alan Duncan, has said that clearing up after him was quite a full-time activity. He was known as the pooper scooper.
But Sir Alan's never been a fan of Boris Johnson. That's a highly prejudicial comment. But what did he achieve? He achieved an enormously successful Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, one of the most successful in modern times, and most importantly, he succeeded the near destruction of the Russian spying network globally.
And a British-Iranian woman, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, languishes in jail, in part because Boris Johnson misspoke.
You crucially say in part. Mrs. Ratcliffe,
well, he contributed, you accept that?
No, I don't.
He could have got her out.
No, she couldn't have done. He tried to get her out, but the responsibility there is with the Iranian government. The Iranian government locks up an innocent woman. This is not Boris Johnson's fault. This is the wickedness of the Iranian government.
Okay, so what do you say to Nazanin's family about why she's still in jail?
She is in jail because the Iranian government is a wicked regime. And the British government has tried hard to get her out, but that it is the wickedness of the Iranian regime that keeps her in prison, not a British Foreign Secretary. Their illegality, their breaches of international law, their failure to abide by the norms of civilization, that's the problem, and it's with the Iranian government.
Okay, so you're a man of faith. Do you think that Boris Johnson has a moral compass?
I'm sure he has a clear view of what he wants to do.
That's not a moral compass.
Well, look, I'm not. It depends what you mean by moral compass. But
well,
I'm not looking for a leader of the party and of the country who is a practicing Catholic who could alternatively be in holy orders. That's not the question.
Are you looking for someone whose mistress had to have an abortion, knowing your views on abortion, where you believe that it shouldn't happen even in cases of rape and incest? No. Reportedly, his mistress had to go and get an abortion. Are you happy with that as a man of faith?
It is not for me to judge other people's private life. I wouldn't begin to do that. What is it?
Judge, though. Are you feeling
You are
comfortable?
actually. You're asking me to judge Boris Johnson's private life, and I don't. People have private lives that are different from their public lives. What I trust him to do is to deliver in the public sphere, and one of the key tenets of Christianity is not to judge, that judgment will come from a higher authority in due course.
I suppose it is just the reason why I keep coming back to his personal conduct is because what people around him, people who work with him, say is that so often his professional conduct does mirror that. So, for example, on drugs, Michael Gove has been under real pressure over his past confessions over drugs. Now, Boris Johnson said in GQ magazine that he took cocaine. Do you have any concern that the man who is heading into number 10 may have committed a crime there?
Well, an ancient interview with the Gentleman's Quarterly about something that may or may not have happened when he was a 19-year-old is, I think, not relevant to what he's going to do in terms of delivering on Brexit and leading the country. And that's the key. I think people are interested in what is going to happen in future, and that Boris is the right man to lead us out of the European Union, to negotiate a settlement with the European Union, but also to bring the country together and develop policies as he did as Mayor of London.
But it's striking, isn't it? He only took 6 questions. He was asked about drugs. He didn't really answer the question. You're here very valiantly answering questions on his behalf. Why is he scared of the media?
No, not at all. Boris has been more examined, put under the microscope than any politician you can think of.
Not recently.
Hold on. We know about Boris not just over 2 or 3 days, but over 10 or 20 years. Some of the other candidates weren't household names before this campaign started, and therefore, quite understandably, they need to answer more questions. But with Boris, we can dig up interviews he gave in 1995 and so on, and we can go through those and try and work out the inner meanings of them, because he's so well known already.
Just because you're here in front of me, have you ever taken drugs?
No, of course I haven't. Have you?
I'm not running for office.
Oh, so that's no comment. Oh, dear.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you very much for joining me. Well, earlier I spoke to Sir Keir Starmer, Shadow Secretary of State for Brexit, and I began by asking him what happens now after that vote.
Well, it's obviously disappointing. It was a very important motion today because what we were trying to do is to prevent any incoming Prime Minister from taking us out of the EU without a deal, without the consent of Parliament for that, or even worse, closing down Parliament, proroguing and not letting us have a say. So we've got to regroup. This was the first opportunity, not the last.
How soon would you move to a no-confidence vote in a new Prime Minister if no deal is just weeks away, potentially?
Well, we're going to have to see. I mean, we're in the middle of the contest for a new Prime Minister at the moment. But we will not pull back from using any mechanism to stop us crashing out without a deal.
Several Conservative rebels voted with you, but several Labour rebels voted with the government. Should they be punished, do you think?
I'm disappointed in that. Of course I'm disappointed in that. My job, for better or for worse, is to try and work with the whole of the Parliamentary Labour Party and keep everybody together and voting as a combined unit. And I'll continue to do that. Well, that'll be a matter for the Chief Whip. I'm disappointed because...
Disappointed enough to see them lose the whip?
Disappointed that they didn't vote with us today, and it looks like had they voted with us today we would have won the vote, and it was a very, very important vote. But I've got enough on my plate without dealing with the job of the Chief Whip.
If you're so concerned about the risk of no deal, something that you say would be disastrous, you could have voted with Theresa May's deal, you could have avoided this cliff edge looming.
This argument that Theresa May deployed for 2 years, which is, I won't build consensus around a deal, I don't care whether the cross-parties like it or not, it's my deal or no deal, was a complete and utter failure. She failed so badly with that deal. And the argument that we should support a deal, which we thought was damaging for the country.
Yeah, not as damaging as no deal, right?
But in which case, a really bad deal should go through. I mean, what is the point in Parliament voting at all? If you're simply saying, here's something, it's got deal written at the top, it's signed off by the UK and the EU, so therefore it's a deal. You've got to vote for this even if you think it's damaging for the economy.
But wind forward to October the 31st,
What's the point of scrutiny if you're going to do that?
OK, but wind forward to October 31st, and we're on the brink of leaving without a deal, and that's disastrous, you say. Would you then think, oh, I wish I had backed Theresa May's deal after all?
No, what we're going to do between now and then is work across Parliament, as we've been doing, across party, to take the opportunity to prevent that happening.
How important, in your view, is it that the leadership now has a clear message on going back to the people in a second referendum?
Well, obviously we're having a discussion within the Labour Party at the moment.
You've been having that discussion for years, though.
Of course, but this discussion has to take place in the right context. We're now at the end of the exercise, there's a deal that can't go through, and I think the position, actually Jeremy Corbyn said it to the PLP on Monday, that any deal must be put back to a public vote is the right way forward. We need to resolve that as a party, but we need to be clear that any deal has to be subject to this lock of a public vote, and equally clear that there has to be an option to remain.
How long are your members who want a second referendum, how long are they going to have to wait to get a clear statement from the leadership on this?
Well, I think we should move with speed.
Days?
I've made that view. Well, hopefully days, but as soon as we can. What's important is that we make the right move and that we do it in a united way, because if we're going to win votes here, we've got to make sure the whole of the Labour Party is going to vote together. So we've got to move that debate on. We've got to get to this position, I think, of a public vote on any deal, and we've got to make the case that Remain is an option. But we've got to do it in a united way, and if we can get to the right position, I'm very happy for a bit of time to allow that to happen.
How frustrating is that for you personally?
Well, I try not to get frustrated. When you're trying to hold different elements of the party together, it can be frustrating. I often joke that I'm going to build a wall in my office so that I can knock my head against it on a regular basis without the need to go outside.
Keir Starmer, good luck with that wall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, joining me now is Tory Leadership hopeful and International Development Secretary Rory Stewart. If leaving without a deal is a fairy story, as you put it, why didn't you vote to block it today?
Because today was Labour taking control of the order paper, which basically means destroying our constitution. The way that the government runs the country is by controlling the business of the House.
You said you would vote to block no deal, and then you didn't. I mean, you can't feel that strongly about
This wasn't a vote to block no deal. This was about Labour asking for a blank cheque to organise the business of government. That's a completely different thing.
But there might not be another chance. If there was, would you vote to block no deal?
The way to stop no deal is to vote for me as Prime Minister, right? I'm standing...
That might not happen.
So I'm standing democratically to say I am totally opposed to no deal.
We don't get a vote for that, so what can you say to people out there who are worried about no deal? What part will you play as a parliamentarian?
Write to your Member of Parliament, particularly if it's a Conservative Member of Parliament, and ask them to vote for me. If you want to stop no deal, you have to get a Prime Minister who will put their energy behind stopping no deal. And I am the only candidate who is saying no deal is going to be damaging, no deal is going to be catastrophic, and no deal isn't anything. It's a failure to reach a destination.
So between now and October the 31st, will you join any other cross-party attempts to block no deal?
I absolutely would, but I don't think I'll have to, because I believe in the members of the Conservative Party. I believe that I can become Prime Minister, and if I'm Prime Minister, then things become much more straightforward, because I'm completely against no deal, and if I were lucky enough to be elected as Prime Minister, I'm elected on a manifesto which is completely about stopping no deal. The best way of stopping no deal, right, is not to engage in strange parliamentary manoeuvres. It is for a government to take no deal off the table, and that's what I would do as Prime Minister.
But you have said that you wouldn't join Labour in a vote of no confidence in a government run by Boris Johnson.
No, I wouldn't, because I don't think this is about party politics. It's about the no deal. Parliament can very easily stop it being the legal default. The only reason why no deal is the legal default is the law-making body, Parliament, made it the legal default, so Parliament can unmake it the legal default. But the most straightforward way of doing it is a Prime Minister who is against no deal.
You've made that very clear, but how much confidence would you have in a government run by Boris Johnson?
Well, he's not my kind of leader. I've made it clear that his policies are not policies that I agree with, so I couldn't serve in his government.
You've been going up and down the country, speaking to people any way you can, answering lots of questions which Boris Johnson notably didn't do today, launching in a circus tent and so on, very different. But are you actually running for the right party? Are you appealing to the right people? Because you're in danger of getting knocked out in this first vote tomorrow.
So it's a very good challenge, because of course it's true. The people I'm appealing to, and I'm completely outpolling Boris and all the other candidates with 18 to 45-year-old voters, with people who live in London, with people who live in Scotland,
who don't have a vote for you tomorrow.
With people who voted for us in 2015 but didn't in 2017. My message to Conservatives, though, is that's not something to be ashamed of, it's something to be proud of. If people in the centre ground of British politics would like to vote for me, are prepared to vote Conservative if I'm the leader, that's something to embrace, because to change this country, make it a better place, make it a happier place, we need to win an election, and winning an election is about votes.
But Boris Johnson made a pretty coherent pitch today that he was a winner. He beat Ken Livingstone in London when the Tories were 17 points behind. You are in danger of getting knocked out tomorrow. I would say you're a loser.
I am in danger of doing that, but we're in a different world now. I'm afraid to say that the Boris now campaigning for a no-deal Brexit, and that's basically what he's doing. He's saying he'd renegotiate by the 31st of October, but he knows, like you and me, that there's no way you're going to get a different deal out of Europe by the 31st of October. So basically he's saying he's trying to leave on no deal on the 31st of October, is promising something he can't deliver, will alienate the entire centre ground of this country, and if he were to pull it off, which I'm not sure he even could pull it off, but if he were to pull it off, I think there will be deep economic harm, and then there will be a lot of angry people blaming him. So the idea that he could win an election, I think, is wrong.
Very briefly, does his personal conduct bother you, or do you think that personal life is personal?
Well, I think personal life is completely personal. I mean, I never touch his personal life or anybody's personal life, but I also believe politics is about principles, about ideas. It's about calling people out, and I do want to know, will he or will he not lock the doors of Parliament? Will he prorogue Parliament? What kind of tariff rates does he want for the motor industry or agriculture? These are not personal attacks on him. This is saying, this is a serious job you're going for. This is a serious country. You're standing to be Prime Minister. Tell us what your policies are.
Rory Stewart, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
The long march to the door of Downing Street via the campaign for leadership of the Conservative Party has continued today. It was the turn of Boris Johnson and Sajid Javid to carry their banners forward, each hoping to lay out a positive Brexit vision in the face of daunting parliamentary arithmetic and a European partner that insists it will not reopen negotiations. Perhaps the supporters invited to both events were there to inject some optimism, given that for much of the past year, let's face it, the conventional wisdom in Westminster was that the task facing Theresa May was so awful that nobody else actually wanted it. Our political editor, Nick Watt, went along to hear the candidates' pitches.
Emerging from the shadows, a showman who's been shunning the stage.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody.
For months, Boris Johnson has been uncharacteristically quiet as he lobbies Conservative MPs. But today, he stepped up with a clear warning on Brexit.
And we will simply not get a result if we give the impression that we want to go on kicking the can down the road with yet more delay. Delay means defeat. Delay means Corbyn. Kick the can again, and we kick the bucket.
When this colourful character takes to the stage, awkward questions are guaranteed.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm told we're going to have 6 questions from representatives of the media.
You brought shame on your party when you described veiled Muslim women as letterboxes and bank robbers.
Too hostile for some supporters. No backing down, but an apology of sorts.
Of course, occasionally some plaster comes off the ceiling as a result of a phrase I may have used, or indeed as a result of the way that phrase has been wrenched out of context and interpreted by those who wish, for reasons of their own, to caricature my views. And if sometimes in the course of trying to get across what I genuinely think, I use phrases and language that have caused offence, of course I'm sorry for the offence that I have caused, but I will continue to speak as directly as I can.
And anti-Brexit supporters trying to stop Boris Johnson's car there as he left after an uncomfortable interrogation at his campaign launch. James Brokenshire, hello. How comfortable do you feel about supporting Boris Johnson, who cannot give a straight answer on racially insensitive language he's used?
I think Boris Johnson actually underlined and recognised what he said during the course of his speech today, that we must be an inclusive nation, that we must actually come together.
That's not the language he uses, that's what he uses on the stage there, but in his columns he has used, as you know, really insensitive language in a racial context.
I think, Nick, if you look at Boris's record as Mayor of London, you know, of our city, a very diverse city, you know, absolutely, how I celebrate that.
Liz Truss, you've known Boris Johnson for ages. How comfortable do you feel that he really struggled with those questions about his character?
I've worked with Boris. I trust Boris. Boris is somebody who says he'll do something and then he delivers. And the really important thing now is we deliver for the British people on Brexit, but also we deliver on increasing economic growth, increasing opportunity right across our country.
Supporters of the first Muslim to contest the Tory leadership were less forgiving.
Well, I don't want to see that sort of Trumpian tactic. As a former journalist myself, it is absolutely imperative that people in positions of elected responsibility, like myself, like Saj, like Boris, like anyone, are held to account, that people are able to ask them questions. That is the way in which modern democracies and freedom of speech works and should work, and we're a better country for it.
Mocking from Sajid Javid.
I'd say I'm a change candidate. Yeah, Boris Johnson is yesterday's news.
Are you concerned that the US-born Boris Johnson is bringing Trumpian tactics to this country?
I think that was a warm-up act for me, Boris's thing earlier today. So I thank him for that. You know, I am concerned about division in politics and whether they are, you know, Trumpian tactics or not. You know, I think that for a healthy democracy, you know, of course you want good, vigorous debate. But I think the best way to do that is to try and bring out the best in people. Try to focus on those things that will unite people and bring them together.
10 campaign launches done, and Boris Johnson is now the clear front runner. In the cabinet, even Johnson skeptics believe he may soon be unstoppable. One minister joked with me, the only thing that can bring him down now is if he's caught selling secrets to the Russians. And the only person who can beat Boris is Boris.
A moment of relaxation before voting begins. Soon the bigger beasts will be vying for the support of weaker candidates as they are culled.
Nick Watt there. So Kwasi Kwarteng is here now. He's a minister in the Brexit department and a firm supporter of Boris Johnson. Now, there was a curious moment today where Boris Johnson said, if you choose me, I will have a new mandate to go back to Brussels and renegotiate. Well, what new mandate? He'll still have the same parliament.
He will. He'll also have the endorsement not only of MPs, I hope, but also of party members. And this is the first time that party members have been brought in to elect a new Prime Minister. So he will have a mandate. It's a Conservative party mandate, but he will also have the authority of the office. He'll be a new Prime Minister. He will probably have a new team. And as he said in his speech, I think it'll be a more dynamic approach to the negotiation. And also, importantly, Mark, he will keep no deal very firmly on the table.
They don't like him, though, in Brussels, do they?
They're not.
I mean, that much is clear, reporting from there over the past 3 years.
But it's a negotiation.
They see him, along with Nigel Farage, as people who, as Donald Tusk put it, have a special place in hell because they led the British people into Brexit without having a plan.
So in a negotiation, it's not necessary to like the opposing team. In fact, I would argue that it would be not very effective to have people around the table that you think are friends. I think that's probably one of the problems that we've had in the last 2 years. I think they regard him as a formidable political opponent. He's someone, after all, who led the referendum campaign. Obviously, they were very frustrated with the outcome of that. They were disappointed. But Boris is a known quantity. He's an effective negotiator. He's an effective leader. He communicates extremely well. And I think that he will shift the dynamic of this Brexit issue.
Another thing I have to say, having reported this, spoken to ministers, leaders, all the rest of it across Europe over the last 3 years, they simply don't believe the British government would go into no deal as a deliberate act. Now, you might say, well, they're silly not to think that, but they just don't believe it. It's never been an effective threat. People talk about putting it back on the table. As far as they're concerned, it's never been on the table. And even today, Boris Johnson was saying he would do his best to get a deal, not to have a no-deal situation. So in what sense is it any more credible than it ever was?
I think they better do believe that no deal is absolutely credible. And that's the problem we've had in the last 2 years. Frankly, our current Prime Minister said no deal is better than a bad deal and wasn't believed. And when it came down to the 29th of March, the Prime Minister asked for an extension. And that's why we got that extension. That's why we're still in the EU. And failure to deliver that, Mark, was exactly put rocket fuel behind Nigel Farage, the Brexit Party, and all the rest of it. And if we don't deliver Brexit, I think that would be a very serious problem, not only for our democracy and for the country, but also for the Conservative Party. So Boris is very clear that no deal has to be taken seriously. He's put it on the table, and that's something that the department that I work in, is preparing very extensively.
He said almost nothing today about his experience as Foreign Secretary, presumably because he didn't have much of a record in that, and he was party to an awful lot of the decision-making made by Theresa May and her cabinet.
So a lot of the critics of Boris, and there are lots of them, are saying that the Foreign Secretary, his tenure in that role, was disastrous. This is completely far from the truth. What happened when he was Foreign Secretary is that Russia did a monstrous attack in this country on a former agent, And there was a response.
Theresa May then appointed Amber Rudd to lead the public response to it and chair the Cobra Committee.
So there was a diplomatic...
So that Boris wouldn't do it.
Mark,
that's what I was hearing from people in Downing Street.
But Mark, you also know that there was a diplomatic response to it, which he was very much...
led by Mark Sedwill.
Which he was very much involved in. He was
Mark
the Foreign Secretary.
Sedwill coordinated the entire international response.
Well, you can't say that the good things that happened were responsible in his tenure was responsible or made by other people, and then criticise him for the bad things. He was responsible for the department. He led an international response to Russian aggression in the way we saw in Salisbury, and also, and this is not widely known, he was very instrumental in widening the Foreign Office's reach across Africa and the Commonwealth. He was a leader in that.
Briefly, is he effectively saying with today's presentation, look, I'm a winner, I'm the guy who can beat Jeremy Corbyn, hold your nose and vote for me? And is that what you've had to do, for example, given some of his previous comments on Africa, on race?
Look, he had written articles 15, 16 years ago, and I remember in the London Mayoralty election in 2008, all those criticisms were hurled at him in 2008. All the journalism, all the comments, and that was 11 years ago. And what happened, we all know. He got elected and he got re-elected. So he's a very effective campaigner. He also was a leading figure in winning the referendum. He's a winner, and he had a lot of energy and dynamism, and he still does. And that's what struck me in the launch today. I left the room, as many did, with a spirit of optimism. We were buoyed up, we were energised, and I'd never seen that in a Conservative, not for a very long time, in a Conservative meeting. It was very exciting, and I look forward to him performing very well, I hope, tomorrow.
Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you so much. Well, looming behind the Conservative hustings is the ticking clock of Brexit, of course, as we've been discussing, and the possibility of a disorderly or no-deal Brexit in October. Some candidates in the Tory race embrace the possibility, claiming that it restores some negotiating leverage, as we were hearing then. Others have said they'd avoid it and that it would be an economic disaster for the country, but aren't exactly clear how they'd avoid it. But would some Tory MPs so opposed to that prospect be ready to vote to bring down their own government in order to prevent it embracing no deal? Here's the former Attorney General.
Even if it means my resigning the whip and leaving the party, I will not allow this country to be taken out of the EU on a no-deal Brexit without the approval of this House and, in my view, going back to the country and asking them if that is what they want. So, for me, desiring the best for my party as a loyal member of it, as far as I'm concerned, this is probably the last opportunity to have a sensible way of influencing the outcome.
Now, of course, there was the Labour-led attempt to rule out no deal. What happened there, Nick?
Well, this is a very big boost for people like Boris Johnson and other Brexiteers who are saying that the UK must leave on the 31st of October, deal or no deal. And the point is, Remainers in the Cabinet are saying Parliament will intervene to stop a no deal. Well, Parliament had a chance today to create some space to have a vote on legislation to do that, and Parliament said no. And the reason why that happened was that 21 Labour MPs either voted against Jeremy Corbyn or abstained, and only 10 Conservative MPs voted with Labour.
And listening to Dominic Grieve, I mean, is he really prepared to bring down a Conservative government, and is he a band of one, or do you think there would be others?
Well, time is running out for the legislative option to stop this, because there's only around about 17 sitting days between the new Prime Minister being appointed and the European Council, so that means all you're left with is the nuclear option of a no-confidence vote. You'd need around about 11 Conservative MPs to vote with Labour on that one, assuming every other opposition MP did that, and if you do that, you're blowing up your career and you face a choice. What's worse, a no-deal Brexit or possibly enabling a Jeremy Corbyn government?
Nick, thank you. Ben, obviously you've been looking at the economic aspects of this. I mean, where is business in terms of preparation?
We've been hearing a lot about the politics of no deal. It's worth remembering the economic consequences of it. Now, one of those economic consequences will be the imposition of hard borders. Now, the government in February announced a scheme which was designed to mitigate this, at least from the UK side, Mark. So this is essentially waving through imports. And it said about 240,000 UK firms should sign up for this scheme. Now, what Newsnight has found exclusively is that only about 18,000 firms have so far signed signed up to this scheme. So that's about less than 10% of the total. And we've put these figures to various business groups, and their verdict is that it's alarming. It's a very low number of firms, and it really reiterates how unprepared businesses are for a no deal on the 31st of October.
OK, so you mentioned those figures, less than 10%. What's the HMRC saying about that?
Well, they've really tried to accentuate the positive. They've told us that many businesses have already registered with HMRC as international traders, accounting for 2/3 of UK-EU trade. Remaining traders can still do so online. It only takes 10 minutes. HMRC's plans include actions and easements to ensure that as many traders as possible are ready on day one to keep trading. Now, I think the key words there are as many as possible, not all, Mark, because the bottom line is here. On the current trajectory, the number of firms who are going to have signed up to this scheme is going to be well below the number who are potentially affected if we do have a no deal on the 31st of October.
Ben, thanks very much for sketching that out.